Hi everyone, this is going to be my summary for the bioenergetics exercise and training. So some essential terms is bioenergetics. It's the conversion of macronutrients, of course carbs, fats, protein, into biologically usable forms for energy. Then there's catabolism, which is the breakdown of large molecules into smaller molecules. An example of that would be the breakdown of protein into amino acids. And then we have anabolism, which is the synthesis of larger molecules from small ones. So that would just be the opposite of catabolism. So you get amino acids into protein. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which allows the transfer of energy from exergonic to endergonic reactions. For the biological energy systems, there are three systems that muscle cells help us replenish ATP. For the anaerobic, it does not require O2 and it occurs in the sarcoplasm of muscle cells. So the first one is the phosphagen PC system. It's the very first system that our body uses for ATP production. It provides ATP for short-term high-intensity activities such as sprinting and resistance training. Then we have glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of the carbohydrates. There's glycogen stored in muscle, and there's also glucose delivered in the blood. The end result of glycolysis is pyruvate, which is catalyzed by an enzyme lactate dehydrogenase. And so there's two ways that the pyruvate can go. The first one is pyruvate will be converted into lactate in the sarcoplasm, and this is actually a faster rate. So this is also known as anaerobic glycolysis, fast glycolysis. Now, if O2, oxygen, is presented in insufficient quantities in the mitochondria, then pyruvate will actually be taken into the mitochondria, where it will then go into the Krebs cycle. And then this rate is slower. So this is what we call the aerobic glycolysis, slow glycolysis. So then we see the pyruvate go to the mitochondria, it's converted into acetylcholine, and then from acetylcholine it enters the Krebs cycle. This is where ATP synthesis happens. Then there's the oxidative system, which is part of the aerobic, which does require oxygen. This is the primary source of ATP at rest and during low intensity activities. At rest, 70% of the ATP is produced from fats and 30% from carbs. So once we start exercising, it shifts from fats to carbs for a source of ATP production. And then if it's like a long duration, it switches back to fats as the source for ATP production. Oxidative metabolism. So we have the blood glucose and the muscle glycogen. Glycolysis, when oxygen is present, the end product of glycolysis is pyruvate, so it will not be converted into lactate, but instead, as I mentioned previously, that it will be transferred to the mitochondria, where it is converted into acetylcholine, and it enters the Krebs cycle. Here, the Krebs cycle, it produces 2 ATPs indirectly from GTP. From the 2 pyruvate and 1 mole of glucose, 6 molecules of NADH will be produced and 2 molecules of FADH. And from those molecules, they transport the hydrogen atoms to the electron transport chain to produce ATP from ADP. For 1 molecule of NADH, there's 3 molecules of ATP produced. And for 1 molecule of FADH, we get 2 molecules of ATP. The net ATP production for blood glucose is 38, and the muscle glycogen net production of ATP is 39. For fat oxidation, triglycerides are stored in the fat cells and can be broken down by hormone-sensitive lipase. And when they are broken down, we get free fatty acids and glycerol. So here we have the free fatty acids, go to the mitochondria where beta oxidation occurs, and then we get the results. We get acetyl-CoA and hydrogen protons. Acetyl-CoA will be taken to the Krebs cycle, and hydrogen protons will be carried by NADH and FADH2 to the electron transport chain. Protein oxidation. Protein's not a major source of energy used to produce ATP, but it also can be broken down into amino acids. So we get protein broken down to amino acids, and then from amino acids we could get glucose, pyruvate, or other intermediates for the Krebs cycle to produce ATP. Rate limiting step in the Krebs cycle. There is one of the rate limiting steps is isooctane converted into ketoglucarate, and that is catalyzed by the enzyme isocitrate dehydrogenase. For resistance training, the phosphagen system is used. For low intensity, oxidative energy system is used. Here, when there is basically the same thing, high intensity exercise, phosphagen, fast glycolysis, and as intensity decreases, we will go to slow glycolysis, oxidate, and then using oxidative energy system. Phosphagens. The concentration in the muscle are rapidly depleted as a result of high-intensity anaerobic exercise. However, for aerobic endurance training, it could increase the resting concentrations of phosphagens and decrease the rate of depletion. For glycogen, we have glycogen stored in the muscle, and we also have it stored in the liver. For the muscle, it is used during moderate and high-intensity exercise, and the glycogen stored in the liver is used for low-intensity exercise. Also, training and diet also influences the resting concentration in the liver and muscle glycogen. Depletion of glycogen. The limiting factor is for both long-duration, low-intensity aerobic exercise and high-intensity anaerobic exercise. Oxygen uptake and aerobic and anaerobic contributions to exercise. This is just similar to what is presented that we've seen in the book. Anaerobic is the very first for the energy for up to 60 seconds, and then it will be transferred to aerobic contribution as the major energy supplier. And then lastly, there are 3 different types of training. There's interval training, which is work to rest, and this is to allow more work to be accomplished at a higher exercise intensity with the same or less fatigue than continuous training. Then we have the HIIT, the high intensity interval training. It's repeated bouts of high intensity exercise with intermediate recovery periods. And then lastly, we have the combination training, also known as cross training, and it is to enhance recovery, and it does rely on the aerobic mechanisms. It is suggested that this could be added to an anaerobic athlete's exercise. And this is what I have for my Chapter 3 summary.